Could Lebanon's economic collapse create a new humanitarian crisis? Dozens of migrants have been drowned after the boat taking them to Europe sank. More people than ever are taking such risky journeys. So what can be done to prevent another tragedy? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Imran Khan. Lebanon's economic meltdown is pushing more people to take to dangerous sea journeys to seek better lives abroad. Dozens drowned off the coast of Syria in the worst capsizing of a migrant boat this year. Survivors say they were heading to Italy. The vessel carrying up to 150 people sailed from Tripoli, the poorest city in Lebanon. Many reportedly paid smugglers thousands of dollars to take them to Europe. The passengers were Lebanese, Syrian and Palestinian refugees living in Lebanon, and they all had the same story of being forced out by poverty and desperation. The United Nations says the number of people who have attempted the journey has nearly tripled since 2020.
They brought me the 2 kids dead. What about the others? Will they bring the others to me? I can't say more than this. My heart is broken.
If I get the chance, I will leave. If there is a boat here right now, I will get on it with my 2 children.
There's no more fear. We're just meat fading away. Let the fish just eat us. It's better than living here. Those in charge are eating us alive here. The sheikhs, the different Palestinian factions, the UN, there is no one, just the people around you here, but no one to support us.
Poverty is what pushed Wissam to sell a property and his house to go on the boat. And then he lost his wife and children. Our government doesn't care about the people and their living conditions.
Years of war, sectarian violence and deep corruption have all led to Lebanon's economic collapse and is yet to appoint a president. The World Bank says the financial crisis is probably one of the world's worst in modern history. The Lebanese lira has lost nearly 95% of its value. Most people can't afford basic food, clean water or medicine. And the United Nations estimates that 80% of Lebanon's population is now poor. And with no electricity, the entire country is mostly in darkness. A recent Gallup poll found that a record 63% of people say they want to leave for good. More Lebanese are now living abroad rather than in the country. And a foreign currency shortage since 2019 means people can't get their hands on their savings. Out of desperation, bank robberies by ordinary citizens have increased dramatically, with branches closing indefinitely to protect their staff. Just this week, a video went viral of Sally Hafez. She held up a bank in Beirut with a toy gun so she could withdraw her own savings. Hafez says she's not a criminal and needed to get her own money to pay for her sister's cancer treatment. She says the country's dire situation has left her with no other choice. Now, Lebanon's Prime Minister Najib Mikati addressed the economic crisis at the UN General Assembly this week.
Our government is working on a financial and economic recovery plan. We're also working on a package of comprehensive structural and sectoral reforms that meet the requirements of the Lebanese people. It also provides them with a social safety net.
Let's bring in our guests from Beirut, Zeina Mohanna, a board member of the NGO Amel International, and in the north of Lebanon, in Harf Arde, Patrick Mardini, the founder and president of the Lebanese Institute for Market Studies, and in Hamburg, Bente Scheller, who directs the Middle East and North Africa office of the Heinrich Böll Foundation, a political foundation affiliated with Germany's Green Party. Welcome all to the programme. I'd like to begin in Beirut with Zeina. Now, Zeina, this was a wholly avoidable crisis. This was corruption, this was mismanagement, and according to every single Lebanese person I've spoken to over the last year, the wholesale theft of Lebanese money. Now, Najib Mikati has been speaking about this at the UN General Assembly. He seemed to be putting the blame squarely on the fact that there were Syrian refugees within Lebanon itself and said, we warned the world that we couldn't cope with Syrian refugees. But actually, these are Palestinian refugees and they are Lebanese people as well. But he did finish by saying that things were going to get much, much worse. And now, for an NGO like yours, I mean, you're already overstretched. Can you cope with much, much worse?
Thank you, Imran, really for highlighting the light on really these tragedies. We're talking about what happened in front of Tartus in Syria, the boat sinking with 77 casualties, only 20 passengers are alive. The same happened a couple of days ago in Tripoli, which is in the north of Lebanon, with 80 people who passed away, including a lot of children and women with all her children. The same scenario we saw in Greece also last week and previously. This is happening every day in Libya and Tunisia. This is quite alarming because we reach really a stage in history where we have the highest number of refugees and migrants, so fleeing due to war and crisis, but also fleeing due to economic situation. So the main foundation for this, so we're seeing this happening a lot among the Syrian refugees and previously the Palestinian, also what we call the PRS, the Palestinian refugees of Syria. But this is also starting with the Lebanese, which is really highlighting how much really with increased crisis, this jumping into the sea, migration into the sea is an increasing component. And we know that technically this is called smuggling, where really people know that they are jeopardizing their life in doing what they're doing. And usually what we see in similar scenarios is that the family divides itself. So half of them jump into the sea and the other one stayed on the seashore. So one parent with half of children and the other parent on the seashore because they know that there are risks of dying. And we know that this is a part of human trafficking because it's a new type that we call dead bondage, where they pay the smuggler or they pay the person who is taking them on the boat to go and flee and trying to reach a country that provides citizenship, that provides nationality and better standards of living. As you highlighted, definitely the political situation is very unfortunate. And this is what's pushing people to take these decisions because they consider themselves dead on the seashore. But as you highlighted now, many things are happening. Prime Minister Mikati was in New York to try to find a solution and to have our cabinet because it has been vacant. And now we might go into a constitutional crisis because also the mandate of our president of the Republic in Lebanon is ending by the end of this month. And we will be really, in addition to all the crises that Lebanon is facing, to sink into other constitutional crises that would put us in jeopardy.
Well, before Amel, Zeina, we get into that whole idea of a constitutional crisis, I want to bring in Patrick Mardini here, and thank you for highlighting all of those issues. But Patrick, one of the key issues here is the fact, and a lot of Lebanese people are saying, well, it's actually down to the people smugglers that are actually encouraging all this to happen. But people smuggling are just taking an opportunity, aren't they? They're just a symptom of what's going on. They're not the cause of it at all, are they?
Indeed, Lebanon is going through a very harsh economic troubles. It has been qualified as one of the biggest crises a country has had in the past 150 years. The Lebanese pound lost like more than 95% of its value. So those people, they still make an income in Lebanese pound, but they can buy with this same income like 5% of what they used to be able to buy 3 years ago. So they cannot buy a lot with the money they have. If some of them have some money at the bank, and I'm talking about the general Lebanese population, right? The banks are in crisis, so you cannot withdraw your money from the bank. We have an economic recession. Companies are closing down, no job, unemployment is increasing massively. The GDP have melted down. We lost 60%. The GDP before the crisis was $53 billion. Today we are at around 20, right? So, you have a total meltdown. People lost their income, lost their jobs. They also lost their life saving. And they don't have a lot of advantage of this situation in order to do the things we've seen.
But Patrick, this was wholly avoidable. This was, as I said, people have been telling me, it's been well reported, that this was mismanagement, this was corruption, and this was simply a completely avoidable. We have to take that into account, don't we?
Absolutely. Many Lebanese politicians have been warning about those kind of things for months now. And they've been telling the international community, give us some money so that we can help those poor people. And when they understood that the international community is unwilling to finance the government because of the corruption that exists in the government, we started seeing those kind of things. So, let's say that some politicians also are trying to take advantage of the tragedy that we are seeing right now. I mean, this is very bad. And if those politicians knew in advance that those things can happen, why didn't they lift a finger before it happened, right?
But let's bring in the view from Europe here. We have with us Bente Scheller, who's in Hamburg. Bente, one of the problems, and there are many issues here, but let's just focus on one of them, is the fact that Europe is now fortress Europe and has been for a very long time. Legal means of migration into Europe are incredibly difficult. That's only compounding not just what we're seeing in Lebanon, but other smuggling routes as well. Does that need to change?
Of course, that needs to change. I mean, we have really seen how Europe, well, it was never easy to get into Europe, but in the past 10 years, I'd say the situation has deteriorated. It is really very difficult to obtain visas. And for most of those who are stuck as refugees in Lebanon or in other neighboring countries of Syria, for many Palestinians who had difficulties having a legal status or citizenship anywhere, it has always been really a nightmare to have a legal way into Europe. And these ways are shrinking by the day. And it's not only that legal means are shrinking, it's also that there are more pushbacks, that there are really security guided efforts by security people that try to push refugees back into countries from which they came. And this is, of course, not compatible with any human rights standards and the values that the European community has always been communicating.
But Bente, Europe can actually deal with refugees. We saw this in Ukraine with Ukrainian refugees. They came almost en masse and they were soaked into society. They were actually have been fairly successful in getting people out of Ukraine and into Europe. So the capacity is there. But when it comes to something like this particular case in Lebanon, where they're economic migrants, the Europeans are saying, well, actually, you don't count as migrants. This is not a disaster. This is, you're coming because you're poor and we don't want you. That is not helpful, right?
Well, Europe has been having several waves of refugees. We have seen refugees over the 90s coming from the former Soviet republics, but also Yugoslavia. We've had 2014-15 when really lots of Syrian refugees came to Europe, and I mean Germany has been taking 800,000 of these. So yes, it's possible. I don't think that it's a big challenge for us to have more refugees here. It's just populist politics that prevent it. And this is, of course, really harmful because populists unite not only in Europe, but also around the Mediterranean. Populists and autocrats, they all try to say refugees are the problem, but no, they are not. The causes that force people to seek refugee status, that force people out of their context, these should be addressed, and these are the problem. But this is not what populists want to talk about. They just want to keep the borders closed and avoid that refugees find the asylum they seek and that they deserve. So yes, it needs to change, and I don't see any reason apart from populist politics why Europe should shut its doors.
In Beirut, Zeina, you've just listened to what our two guests have said there. I mean, let's split this question into two. Firstly, what can Beirutis, what can Lebanese people actually do about trying to stop this? Is there a political solution here, or is the international community now have to step in because Lebanon is simply a failed state?
Yeah, you just to build on your previous question before also in answering this one, actually you were asking about civil society, and really Lebanon who's been facing now all the type of crises, monetary, health, socio-economic, political, the Beirut blast, which is the biggest after Hiroshima, Nagasaki, constitutional, etc. Really, the civil society is making up the role of the government. So us, like Amel Association, has provided more than 9 million solidarity support to the Syrian crisis, previously the Iraqi, the Palestinian, etc. And this has been really alarming. States can support, but definitely we need to have international shared responsibility towards these migrants and refugees, because we are seeing really, as highlighted, that some countries are opening their doors and others are closing. Definitely big salute to Germany, who accommodated the biggest number of Syrian refugees, seeing how much also they can play a role in building the economy, but other countries really closed. But we also saw double standards, like with the Ukrainian crisis, all the doors were open, jobs were provided, etc. Refugees and migrants are refugees and migrants everywhere. So whenever things are happening, we really hope that there is solidarity at all levels. Lebanon has provided the biggest solidarity component by welcoming 1/3 of its population refugees in comparison to its population, so 4 million, and accommodated 1.5 million Syrian refugees in addition to the previous migrants. And this is really a model for solidarity forward. But the issue with the Global Compact on Migration that was out a couple of years back, where the main message was, it's one of the latest international human rights document calling for looking at migrants as an opportunity and not as a threat. Definitely, this is welcome, and this has been addressed to neighboring countries of the Syrian crisis, which has been the biggest since Rwanda 94 in terms of humanitarian. But we know that the solutions are always political, and we hope that similar types of crises are solved politically. We call for more peace, more solidarity, more non-violent solutions to what's happening, because the civilians are the ones who are paying the price the most.
Well, let's bring in Patrick Mardini here. Patrick, you're the president of the Lebanese Institute for Market Studies. Is there a role the market can play here? Is there a role business can play here that actually allows for this to actually become manageable? Because right now, the only thing that's propping Lebanon up is the amount of foreign remittances coming in from Lebanese living abroad, right?
Right, absolutely. I think that before looking at what others can do for us, we need to start by looking at ourselves in the mirror. And the problem is in Lebanon is that you have many qualified people who are good engineers, who are skilled labor, but unable to be able to work properly because you don't have electricity, you don't have internet. And those are the basics, right? Many people might be able to work online, make some income without the need to travel, to migrate, to leave the country. However, if the government has, the case in Lebanon is that the government has a monopoly over the production of electricity, and they produce almost 0 hours of electricity per day. And the government has a monopoly over the production of internet, and internet is a catastrophe. In Lebanon, right? And the government won't allow any other entity to come in, sell electricity or sell internet services in order to provide this infrastructure for businesses and for people to lift themselves out of poverty instead of migrating. And I think that that's the real problem. To give you a simple example, today, if you want to do a solar farm in Lebanon and provide electricity to your village, you are not allowed by law, because you have a monopoly somewhere in Beirut that would say that they are the only one allowed to produce and sell and sell electricity, and they won't give licenses to anybody else to produce and sell electricity directly to the population. Some pilot projects have been made in Lebanon, have been done. They show that with really low cost, you can give electricity to the population. The government won't allow it. So, the government also should start taking on their responsibility and, and allow people to get out of poverty instead of banning them from doing this and banning them from doing that.
Bente Scheller in Hamburg, you've listened to what our guest has to say. What do you think of that? Do you think that we talked about populist policies earlier and refugees being something that is a populist policy when it comes to bashing them over the head and saying that they're bad and they're criminals and whatever. However, there is a way here of putting pressure on the Lebanese government now to be able to open up its marketplaces, things that actually international governments can do that might actually be a populist policy, surely.
Well, actually, I think it's really difficult to put pressure on the Lebanese government. Currently with the caretaker government and all the question marks regarding the presidential elections that are upcoming, we don't even see when a new government will form. And how are you going to exert pressure? How are you going to really do something that makes you confident that things will go better? And I think discussions with the Lebanese government have been there before. The Lebanese government has always reached out to the international community and asked for more help. But then the problem is what we exactly discussed before: corruption, clientelistic networks. And therefore, I think what would need to happen would be that confidence would be established or re-established by the Lebanese government and the political elite that has been leading us into this crisis. They would need to signal that they are ready to lead the country out of it. And I'm missing any signals for that. We haven't seen any serious plan for reform. the same people are remaining in power. There is no accountability, neither for the blast nor for other assassinations that have been taking place in the past year or before. So in absence of all this, how is anybody going to trust that international aid will really serve the purpose to help the population or to help civilians in Lebanon?
Well, Bente, we will get into that. Let's get into that. And I will bring Zeina in to talk about the international aid. But it sounds like you have something to say, Patrick.
Yes. I don't think that international aid is the solution. Nobody is asking money from the international community. And I know that your guests from Germany have a green, let's say, sensitivity, and I do. I mean, you just need the government to allow people to have their solar farms. Today, we don't want money from Germany. We don't want money from the Lebanese government. We just would like to have the municipalities have their own solar farms to give their villages electricity, or to license some companies locally to sell their electricity based on solar power, for example. The problem is that now we need to go to the central government to ask for that. I mean, those small reforms don't need money, don't need trust. You just need to ask our government to stop centralizing everything at the central government and requiring licenses and never give licenses. Just allow people, for instance, to have their own solar farms without the need of any license.
We have with us Zeina, who is a member of the Amel International, an NGO. Amel is doing some sterling work, but I want to ask the question to you, Zeina. What Patrick has said, it needs to come from the government. It needs to be business that might be the solution. Free market economy. It's not the international community. Do you agree?
Actually, we have seen lately a lot of funds really came for the explosion. It was a beautiful solidarity. But once the Ukrainian case took place, we have seen that a lot of money were channeled there. And we can tell you that NGOs here only secured around half of their funds for 2023. So aid and funds are really cut in the region due to things. And definitely this is putting into question what's happening in the geopolitical arena, where there are now analysis, would the world go into bipolarity forward? And also looking back after the pandemic, where previously really capitalism had been going straight, but later we saw the call for more socialist regimes. But now we're seeing again that fundamental rights are really going there. And where is really social justice, welfare state? Previously we were talking about globalization, but then terrorism ramped up, and now our priorities are more security and safety. So this international shared responsibility for refugees and migrants really needs to be equitable. Definitely a migrant or a refugee in a developing country would be better off in terms of standard of living than in a developed, in a third world country, we call it. So definitely first world countries are better off to welcome refugees and migrants to ensure more sustainability of their living. And this calls back to the UN Charter that speaks about the right for development, where definitely we wish that there are more funds allocated for self-governance, where states really should assume supporting their people, because we believe that no refugee, no migrant would like to leave their state and take away their culture if they had the option.
Sorry, Zeina, we are running out of time, and I do want to bring back Bente here. Bente, it seemed like you had some opinions on what you've just heard there.
Yeah, I mean, I totally see Patrick's point, and I think all that is happening in Lebanon on the civil society level, it's very admirable, and also the ability of private networks to cope. However, in what Patrick has mentioned, the solution that the government should give up on its monopoly of power production, it's a very, very sticky point. We've been discussing that for many years, because it's not that they hold the monopoly for the monopoly, they hold it for the benefits. So they benefit from fuel imports. There are people who benefit from running generators, and these are absolutely adamant against any other solution. This is part of why solar panels are not more common in Lebanon. There are examples of how citizens pushed for more power in their regions. Zahle maybe is the best example, where the community of Zahle, the municipality, was in the end willing to offer power 24 hours a day, which the government in Beirut couldn't. And then the generator mafia went out on the streets. Those who own the generators and benefit from them, they tried to shut down and actually shot down the transformation towers, the power hubs that the local municipality established. So this is where international pressure meets its limits, because the government does not want to give up on these things, because they see they can still benefit from it, and therefore it's not an easy way. What you're suggesting sounds so logical, but with a corrupt and really very, very hard and traditionally corrupt system, it's really difficult to get these practical points through.
I want to thank all our guests, Zeina Mohanna, Patrick Mardini and Bente Scheller. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Imran Khan, and the whole team here, bye for now.